When Larry was photographing, he was deeply empathic. And he was with whoever he was with. I mean, he photographed Ralph Reed, an early Christian right group, and he went to this men's conference to photograph them. And he came back saying, I'm really going to be a better husband. You know, like things like this. He gave a gazillion %. He didn't have any boundaries up. I think photography for him was social as well as everything else. It's hard, how did I view Larry as a photographer? I don't know. He just was always the person I knew who was a photographer. I don't know how, if you ask my friends, how did you view Martha as a painter? I don't think that they would necessarily answer that it was independent. But I also want to say that Larry knew more about painting than most artists, visual artists, painters. And you can see that in his work. And so I was always happy to have him look at my paintings or drawings. Well, I mean, clearly he loved Caravaggio, but he loved the degenerate artists, you know, coming out of the Nazi era. He loved Turner. He loved art. He knew painting. He knew composition. His parents collected paintings. Actually, his father was an insurance salesman and often took payment in paintings instead of money. And I think it was a de Kooning his mother didn't like. So she didn't take that. But so that's how we acquired a lot of the Sawyer paintings, I assume, and drawings. And you know, he had a deep love of music, as you know. I would have to go through our library, I think, to really review everything. It was a very eclectic library of art, and he could speak very eloquently on numerous artists, and there were artists that I didn't know that he knew. There was always music in the home, always, and it was always very, very loud because Larry couldn't hear. And we lived about 30 minutes from a jazz club in Delaware Water Gap called the Deerhead Inn, which is the oldest continuous jazz club in the United States, and it would have really important people come to play there. I think Larry would have preferred to have been a musician to a photographer. I can't express how deeply he loved music. His sister as well. His sister, Elizabeth Fink, they could listen to a piece of music, they could tell you who was on bass, who was on sax, who was on clarinet, who was on whatever. They knew it so much. They didn't just know the composer and the main player. They knew everything. And Lorraine Gordon, who owned the Village Voice, Larry was the only photographer who was allowed to photograph there. No one else was. And Lorraine Gordon, and I guess Max Gordon, when he was still there, were good friends of Larry's parents. So they were all friends of the family. You know why he became a photographer? He loved painting, because he could never paint the way he wanted to paint. At least that's what he told me. Teaching at Bard the early times. I mean, it was much more difficult to get into Bard at that time. It was very difficult to make it through the photography department. He and Stephen Shore and Larry, I should say, because Stephen was the chair of the department, built this brilliant photography department. And it was a very good combination of the two. You know Stephen's work, and I don't know if you met Stephen, but Stephen's personality is a little more proper or structured, or anyways. He and Larry made a good team because they brought two very, very different approaches in personality and work. And so the students could gravitate wherever the best fit was. Larry loved teaching in the early days. And there was a book that came out in I guess the early 90s. It was called 25 Under 25, and it was 25 photographers under 25. And Larry's, there had been something like, 15 or 20, I don't remember which, but it was a great number, who had been students of Larry's. Many at Bard, but not all. Larry had workshops at the farm very early on. Who was there? Todd Heido was there. Gail Albert Halvett was there. I can't remember everyone, but it was like a really impressive group of people. And it would be fun. We'd be in this back room of the barn. I would make a turkey, and everyone would and I'd get some wine, and everyone would bring wine and food and snacks. And we'd make this huge meal. And again, I don't even remember where everybody stayed. There are a lot of outbuildings there, but at that time they weren't as organized, and I think we had a bunch of outhouses still at that time. Pre-internet days, pre-cell phone days. And it was really fun. People would come for a weekend, and everyone would show their work, and Larry would critique, and then they'd look at Larry's work and ask questions. And it was really wonderful. It was really, he loved being able to encourage photographers and people and artists and whatever. I mean, it gave him tremendous happiness. This is Stacia Horvath and her two daughters. So I'm not sure how old they are exactly here, but they were younger than this when Larry started to photograph them. So we met Stacia. Actually, I talked to her to try and get a timeline on this, to figure out when we actually met her, when Larry was in the hospital. And it was either 2009 or 2010. And Stacia was Larry's nurse. And she was wonderful. Larry loved her. I loved her. Larry was in the hospital for about a week. I don't remember what the issue was. But I was so grateful to Stacia. And after the fact, I wanted to visit her. We found out that she and her husband had a farm, and they raised rabbits and chickens and geese and ducks and I think pigs. And so I wanted to go and buy something just to say thank you. This is Dennis. And I went there, bought myself a chicken, and I came home and I said, honey, this is your next family. I was referring to the Sabatine family being the first family. And he started to photograph them. And, well, let's see. Now, the girls both had babies recently. One of the babies is 7 months old, and the other baby, I think, is 4 months old. So we have been friends all these many, many years. And Stacia, God bless her, when Larry became more unwell and was pretty much bedridden, she gave us 1 day a week from her days off to help take care of Larry, so I could, get out of the house if I needed to, shopping, sometimes even just go take a nap. And toward the end of Larry's life, she took family leave and stayed in our home for the last 5 days of Larry's life. Anyway, she's the whole family is incredibly dear to me. And I love the photographs. Larry called these photographs kindred spirits. And he photographed all kinds of parties and events and non-events. And they were wonderful because they were they didn't care about the camera at all. It wasn't even that they were not conscious about the camera. The camera was there, they just didn't care. These are, I assume these are all digital prints because they're later. Are they? No, there's some silvers, I think, in this collection. But once Larry got a digital camera, he just got this little boring Sony point and shoot. He was even more fluid in photographing the family because he had this little camera he could just put in his pocket. and not only photographing the family, but whenever he had important shoots to do, he'd usually have his assistants rent a fancy camera, but for the most part, he was very happy to just use a point and shoot, a little tiny Sony camera. And a number of photographers and curators, when they would see the digital work, were completely surprised that these were just digital cameras and not even a fancy digital camera. So Trinity, this is Trinity, she just finished nursing school and she's now a nurse. And Caden is in nursing school now. I just noticed the chicken kind of looks like a heart on a balloon above her head. And I met Larry at an opening of a mutual friend at a small gallery in Easton. And Larry heard my name because I was a new artist in the area. He was on break from Bard College, which meant he had like 2 months. It was a really long winter break. We met in January. And we were at this opening, and Larry was spouting off some annoying political banter about being a red baby diaper and communism, socialism rather, and this and that. And I'm there with my friend, who is also now my dealer in New York, and she came from a comparable background. And I literally pushed her in front of Larry, and I said, "You two have so much more in common to talk about." And I walked away. Larry wanted to see me again, and I knew that he was quite well known. I wasn't overly familiar with his work because I was a painter and a sculptor, and frankly, I wasn't really familiar with photography. And he came to see me for a proper date, and he did some research, and he saw that I had used a lot of red and vermilion in my paintings, and he came with the book about the loggers, the original one, with a photograph in it. It was, the special edition. And he brought me a bouquet of glorious red peppers. Some of the longer red peppers, not just the little bell pepper shapes. And I thought, this is kind of interesting. This is someone who pays attention to things. And I guess we started seeing each other fairly regularly after that. That summer, Larry, he got the big award in Arles. I don't remember what it's called, but I think you have the medallion. And he asked me if I would stay and take care of the farm. And I did. I loved the farm. I should also say that when I first went to the farm, the first time I went to the farm, which was relatively soon after we met, I totally fell in love with the farm. I am someone who never liked to stay away from my own home or my own bed. And I think I stayed at the farm almost all the time, in my own room. But I immediately fell in love with the farm and the vibration of the farm, equally to Larry, I think. And so when Larry went to Arles, I took care of the farm, and then I was just there. I think I moved all my stuff in there, broke my lease in my apartment in Easton. He made me feel seen, he made me feel important, he made me feel beautiful. I was much larger at the time, and my first husband was always complaining that I was heavy. I looked the same, I was just a larger version. I looked exactly the same. I was the same shape, just a little bit bigger. So I felt all of those things with him that I had never felt before. And he was generous. I had a flat tire. He said, "Sell me something for X amount of dollars." And I sold him something, and he said, "This is too cheap." And I said, "But that's how much my tire costs, and this is what I need now." He was kind and generous. And I felt seen. That's the thing. I felt seen. You have to forgive me because part of me loves to talk and teach about photography and the visual arts in general. So I want to talk about this photograph briefly. So here's a photograph. There's so much stuff happening in it, right? And of course the main energy is here, right, in the ring. But why doesn't the photograph fall apart after that? It doesn't fall apart. And again, this is Larry's genius and knowledge of painting. And we're going to follow these lines that subconsciously keep you centered where the energy is. And so you're going to follow these diagonals, and the light's here, and the diagonals, and then you're going to come back here, and you've got two vertical figures who are pushing you back into the energy of the photograph. It doesn't fall apart, nothing gets lost. And here's Mike. Bert Sugar wrote the essay for this book. A lot of these photographs were done in Philadelphia. And actually, I don't remember how long ago it was, but we were invited to the Boxers' Ball, which is I don't know if they still have it. At that time, it was an annual event. Oh, yeah. Again, you look at a photograph like this, and he stays in the space, right? Stays in the space. There are all these things that anchor him to the space. The photograph doesn't disappear. And I know that this was not a surprise. I know that Larry saw the composition. And even if he didn't intentionally see it, it was so organic to him after all these years of photographing that he just knew everything. Again, this line, it does more than just be a crack in the wall. I always thought that a lot of Larry's boxing photographs, and this is one of the ones, they felt very religious. And Larry also, I believe, gave photographs to all of these guys. This is another one that feels very spiritual to me. I'm looking for the photograph that I call the Bernini sculpture. This is a great photograph. All these different designs and textures, and the photograph holds still. Mike again. I call this the Bernini because it just reminds me of a Bernini sculpture. It's one of my most favorite photographs ever of Larry's. And actually, some people might be surprised, but the boxing work is some of my most favorite work of Larry's. Peter Barberi tells a story, and so I'll paraphrase it. The Philadelphia Museum of Art wanted to buy a portfolio of Larry's, and of course they wanted social graces. Everyone wants social graces. And Larry really wanted the museum to acquire this body of work. It may have been the first museum to have acquired it. And Peter said, well, blah, 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 blah. And Larry said, just come and look at the work, and if you don't want it, you'll take the social graces. And of course, you see the work, and it's glorious. And they did purchase that portfolio, or you know what, it may have been donated by a donor. I'm not positive at this point. And there was a very big show at the Philadelphia Museum. And Larry invited all the boxers and their sweethearts to come to the opening, and it was so great. Also, when Larry had a show at the Whitney, I don't remember what show that was. Maybe that was a boxing show too. Maybe this, I'm confused. This is a show that all the boxers came to with their sweethearts. And big gold and big coats. It was great fun. And the staff and curators at the Whitney, I think, were a little surprised to see the patrons not quite what they were used to at an opening. I mean, this could be a stained glass window in a church and a shadow of a cross. there is, Graphiche did a fancier version of this book, which I know you have, and I believe I sent to Michael personally, because the printing in those books is superior, much more superior. It's more like the printing in the new book. Mm-hmm. And I think the limited edition book may have had a photograph, or maybe it didn't, but it's, you know, I look at these and I see how flat they are compared to the other printing. That's a really beautiful portrait. I guess the thing again about Larry, you can see the trust in these photographs of the people he's photographing. And also, Larry would often, as I said previously, would just hang out. He might just hang out for a long time before he even photographed anyone. So there was also a trust there. You know, I respected his work as an artist so much. And I wanted to make sure he was cared for. And of course I loved him. But when times were difficult, and they were difficult. Larry was an artist of a male artist of a certain era. And when I wasn't sure if it was the right place to be, I would ask myself, are we better together or independent of each other? And it was a very serious question that I would ask myself. And I always felt that we were better together. And, you know, we ebbed and flowed. We had a wonderful marriage, and we have a shitty marriage, and we had a wonderful marriage, and I had my own house. So, so when things were really shitty, I'd go there. But for the most part, looking back, it was a wonderful relationship and partnership. And sometimes it was a wonderful romance, but it was a real relationship. And it was a strong relationship, and he trusted me.